And it came to be in the days of Ahaz, son of Yotam, son of YishaYahu, sovereign of Yahudah, that Retzin, sovereign of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, sovereign of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to fight against it, but could not prevail against it, right? Just like the many will not prevail against the few. And it was reported to the house of David. And just in case you guys don't know, remember that Yahudah were just a couple of tribes, while Israel were 10 tribes. So there were many in that sense as well, not just the way they acted as a representation of the many of the end times, but also the fact that there were many in comparison. So, verse 2, and it was reported to the house of David, right, the king, saying, and it was reported to the house of David, saying, Aram has set up camp in Ephraim. Now, okay, you see something also, yeah, I wanted to say something, my bad. It says that Retzim, sovereign of Aram, right? Aram, remember that's where um the Laban was from Aram. Laban was the father of the two wives of Jacob. So the mothers of the tribes of Israel were from Aram, right? So there was a close relationship between those two families from back in the day that in a way continued, because now we see that Retzin, sovereign of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, sovereign of Israel. So Israel and Aram got together to go against Yahudah, right? So that shows how the many will prefer to get together with the nations to come against us. Went up to Jerusalem to fight against it, but could not prevail against it. So the nations and the many will not be able to defeat us. And it was reported to the house of David, who represents the last, saying, Aram has set up camp in Ephraim, and his heart and his heart and the heart of his people were moved as the trees of the forest are moved with the wind. Right? So you see this metaphor that they give here, and it's obviously used by the Ruach HaKodesh to show us that people are like trees, armies are like forests. The wind is the spirit. So people, you know how when they are in a bunch, right? When there's a bunch of people like in football games and all of that, there's a spirit that moves them when they are all together, and sometimes they do crazy stuff that they wouldn't do if they were alone or just a few. So in a way, we see here, like I said, that humans are like trees, the armies like forests, and being moved by the wind is being inspired by a specific spirit. So, and it was reported to the house of David, sorry, Aram has set up camp in Ephraim, and his heart and the heart of his people were moved as the trees of the forest and moved with the wind. As the trees of the forest are moved with the wind. And Yahweh said to YishaYahu, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and YishaYahu. Now this is a name that confirms the interpretation that I have mentioned so far. YishaYahu means a remnant will return. She'ar is remnant. Yashub, he will return. So a remnant will return, meaning the chosen few represented by Yahudah. So Yahweh is telling YishaYahu as if he was the prophet like Moshe to go with YishaYahu as his son, who represents the chosen few. So, and Yahweh said to YishaYahu, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and YishaYahu, your son, at the end of the channel of the upper pool, on the highway of the launderer's field. Now this connects the name of the field connects with what we read in Malachi chapter 3. In Malachi chapter 3 verse 1, we see how Yahweh refers to the three people that he would send throughout history. Three main characters, if we could say that word, in history, the three main people, which would be, and I mean sent by Yahweh. Obviously, there's a lot of important people in the world in history, but I mean in scriptures sent by Yahweh would be Eliyahu, then the Messiah, and then the prophet like Moshe. And we see this here where we read, "See, I am sending my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me." We know that that was John the Baptist. Then suddenly, the sovereign you are seeking, we are seeking salvation, comes to his Heikal. Yahushua came and entered the temple. Not only his soul entered his body when he was born and then resurrected, or well, conceived and then resurrected, but also when he entered Jerusalem in a literal sense and he flipped the tables. So then suddenly the sovereign, and that's why it says suddenly, because John the Baptist came, and 6 months later, Yahushua was born after John the Baptist was born. So it says, "You are seeking," comes to his Ekal. And then it says, "Even," and some interpret this as being the same, and in a way it is because it's first and last, but they are separated by 2,000 years, the first manifestation and the last manifestation of Yahweh. So we see here that it says, "Even the messenger," or malach. You see how it mentions a messenger, then at last another messenger, but in the middle it says the sovereign, right? This is important because we have that in Revelation 11 it says that the two witnesses are the two olive trees that stand next to the sovereign of the world. So we see here one messenger as an olive tree because he receives the ruach to be sent, and then we have another messenger here. It's interesting as well that this messenger, they write it with small m, while this messenger, they write it with a big, like, capital M, right? Showing that this is like, we could say more important than this one, in the sense that, remember that John the Baptist, or Eliyahu, is like Aharon, who was the prophet of Moshe, and Moshe represented Elohim as the leader of the people. And Yahushua is a priest, but according to the order of Melchizedek. So he's the priest that remains in heaven at the right hand of the Father. So just as in heaven, the Father and the Son are standing together, on earth, the witness like Moshe and Eliyahu would stand together, pretty much fulfilling the same role, but on earth. So heaven and earth become one when everything, or every piece, is in its place. So here we see a messenger, then the sovereign, and then a messenger. The messenger with a capital M is the messenger of Yahushua, mentioned in Revelation 22, when Yahushua says, "I send my messenger to give testimony," or to testify to the congregations, meaning he is a witness. So one of the two witnesses. And it says, "Even the messenger of the covenant," that is the malach of the pact, of the covenant, the same one mentioned in the book of Daniel. And there we confirm that it is Michael coming as a person, like the angel normally known as Michael, right? Coming as a human being, accepting Yahushua HaMashiach as his sovereign, and therefore being able to fulfill his part, which is to gather the chosen few to bring them to Mashiach. And then after he dies and resurrects, he also receives authority to take Satan out of heaven in Revelation 12. So that's when he confirms the covenant, and that's why he's called the messenger of the covenant, in whom you delight. So Yahushua, whom you are seeking, the last in whom you delight. See, he is coming, right? And then to confirm that it is referring to the last, we continue reading, and it said Yahweh of hosts, "And who is able to bear the day of his coming? And who is able to stand when he appears?" Remember that everybody was able to stand when Yahushua was there, because Yahushua came to forgive, not to punish. Then he says, "For he is like a fire of a refiner." Yahushua HaMashiach is the water of life. Here is talking about the messenger of the covenant, and he says that he is like a fire, meaning he is the last of a refiner, and like the soap of a launderer. And this is the reason why I came to this verse, right? the launderer, because we go back to YishaYahu, and he says, at the end of the channel of the upper pool on the highway of the launderer's field. So is representing at the end of time, at the end of the channel of the upper pool on the highway of the launderers. And as we saw in Malachi, he would come like the soap of a launderer, and he shall sit as a refiner and cleanser of silver. Today, my sister was listening to something, and I overheard, and it reminded me um, that I think I had heard the same, but I don't think I ever mentioned it here. And interestingly enough, we're reading this, so it's the perfect time. Um, so it was about this preacher. I think it was a preacher who, or a believer who, reading this, was started thinking about how this process is the to refine silver. And she went and asked somebody who did it as a job, and he told her that to do it, you needed to keep the silver in the hottest part of the fire, and you had to keep a very close eye on it, because if you didn't do so, then in a moment you could ruin it, right? So you had to keep an eye to make sure that when it was perfectly refined, then you would take it out. Also, not to drop it, of course. So it would have to be kept in the hottest part of the oven or of the fire. uh, he would have to be right there next to it, watching it, and therefore he would get hot as well, right? Um, Watching it very closely. And that means pretty much not only that the last would have to do that in the sense of as a preacher, but that Yahweh does that for us, right? That's the main point, of course, that Yahweh is with us, close to us, and when we are in the fire, even though we have to go through the worst part of the fire, he will be with us, and that will be what we need in order to be purified. Um, but he will always watch in order for that fire not to destroy us, but only get to the point where we will be perfected. Um, but the best part of it was when she asked, "And how do you know when it's ready?" And he said, "When I see my reflection on it." So, which means, right, that Yahweh will be done with us going through the fire when we are a reflection of his power, of his image, when we are like him. Just like David said, right, that he will be satisfied when he um, wakes up in his uh, image. So we have here that it says, and he shall sit as a refiner, sit because he has to be there watching it, and a cleanser of silver. And he shall cleanse the sons of Levi and refine them as gold and silver, and they shall belong to Yahweh. Gold and silver, the few and the many, bringing near an offering in righteousness. So going to Isaiah, at the end of the channel of the upper pool on the highway of the launderer's field. And say to him, right? So Yahweh is telling YishaYahu, go with your son who represents the few. You represent the prophet like Moshe. Go to the end, which represents the end of time, the end of the pool, and the place where the launderer is. So go like a launderer with the soap, which is the word of Yahweh to cleanse us, right? So it says, and say to him, take heed. He's talking to the leader of the many who got together with the king of Aram, right? Representing the nations. So it says, say to him, take heed and be calm. I'm sorry, I think, because he's saying, go now to meet Ahaz. Okay, Ahaz, which is, oh yeah, Ahaz is the good one, the son of Yotam, son of Uzziyahu. So the one from Yahudah. So he's, Yahweh sent a word to the one that represents. Also, in this case, let me go back and explain it better. Um, you see how Ahaz, he has grasped whom Yahweh has perfected by the strength of Yahweh. So this represents the last, as I've been saying, but in this case, it's Ahaz, the one that was alive at the moment reigning, right? And he is the king, so that represents the last. And YishaYahu as Yahushua, right? That represents the word of Yahweh. So the word of Yahweh, Yahushua, as YishaYahu, coming to the king who has to fight against the many and the nations. So I hope now it's understood better because I did make a mess a little bit. So it says, and say to him, take heed and be calm. Do not fear or be faint hearted for these two stubs of smoking firebrands. That is interesting because that is something similar to what Yahweh says in Zechariah, referring to the priest of the moment named Yahushua, who represents the last in that context. Even though it has the name of the first, Yahushua HaMashiach, represents the last because it mentions sin. And we know Yahushua doesn't have sin. So, um, yeah, that's why it mentions him being a firebrand because he was, because of his sins, going in the fire, but Yahweh saved him. So it took him out of the fire. But since he was taken from the fire as the prodigal son, he was on fire. So now Yahweh uses that fire to burn all the falsehood in the world and burn the enemy himself. So it says, take heed and be calm. In this case, it's talking about these two who, by the fact that they are rebelling against the Most High and going against the few represented by Yahudah, they will be thrown in the fire. Take heed and be calm. Do not fear or be faint hearted for these two stubs of smoking firebrands, for the fierce displeasure of Retzin and Aram and the son of Remaliahu. So also, you see there are two stubs. One is of Israel, so represents the leader of the many. So that would be the false prophet, the second beast of Revelation 13. And the king of Aram would be the world leader, the king of the nations, the first beast that comes from the water, which represents the nations, right? In Revelation 13. So I repeat what Yahweh told the king of Yahudah through YishaYahu. Take heed and be calm. Do not fear or be faint hearted for these two stubs of smoking firebrands, for the fierce displeasure of Retzin and Aram and the son of Remaliahu. Because Aram, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliahu have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Yahudah and tear it apart and break it open for ourselves and set a sovereign over them, the son of Tabeel. Now, so they wanted to take out the king, the true king of Yahudah, and they wanted to place their own king. So that is like the world leader, the first beast, and the false prophet, the leader of the religion of the world, the second beast of Revelation 13, they get together to put the image of the beast to replace Yahushua HaMashiach. Therefore, when they give the Antichrist. So this would be a representation of the Antichrist, Tabeel. And now let me just go and see the name, verse 6. You see, it says, Elohim is good. It comes from Tov and El. Elohim is good. That's interesting because remember that the last is the one that manifests the good of Yahweh. Yahushua came as the life, the tree of life. The last comes as the tree of good and evil. That's why he has to go through being the prodigal son, because he has to know that part as well, and be saved from it by Yahushua the first, who is the life, the tree of life. So the last comes as the good, but they want to replace the king of Yahudim with Tabeel, who represents the false Messiah. So they will present the false Messiah as if he was the real Messiah. So you remember also that Yahweh said that they call good evil and evil good. So in Isaiah chapter 5, right? And we are reading Isaiah chapter 7. So, 2 chapters back, Yahweh mentioned that they call evil good and good evil. And now they want to dethrone the king of Yahudah, who would be uh, the representation of true good, and they want to put their own leader in order to be able to control Yahudah, the Yahudim. And they call that leader good. But Yahweh already said 2 chapters back that they call good evil and evil good. So this good is actually evil. I hope that's understood. Let us go up against Yahudah and tear it apart and break it open for ourselves and set a sovereign over them, the son of Tabeel. You see how it's interesting that it says the son of Tabeel. It doesn't say the name of the person, but it says the name of the father of the person, because that's what we need to understand the interpretation, the definition of this name, and in this case, not the name of the actual guy they wanted to put as king, right? Because it says the son of Tabeel. Thus said the sovereign Yahweh, it is not going to stand, nor shall it take place. For the head of Aram is Dameshek, and the head of Dameshek is Retzin. And within 65 years, Ephraim is to be broken as a people. All right. So obviously, this 65 years will refer to the literal 65 years that went by from that moment till Ephraim was heard as a nation. Now, when it comes to the other part as well is connected to historical events, but when we see this spiritually, remember that Aram means exalted. Dameshek has a couple meanings depending on how you see it. One of the meanings is the weaver of sackcloth, but also the blood of the heir. In this case, it's going to mention the sackcloth or the, let me see, was verse, here it is, Aram, Dameshek, then it says Retzin. All right. Dameshek, silent, is the sackcloth weaver, but Dam is blood. Meshek is heir. So the blood of the heir, right? And we know the blood of Mashiach, who is the heir and gave us the inheritance. Retzin, we already saw, it means firm. So when we see this again, this verse, for the head of the exalted one is the blood of the heir. The one whom Yahweh will exalt on earth, which is the last, has Yahushua as his head, as we see also prophesied in the New Covenant, that he had to come to be subjected to Yahweh through Mashiach in order to be able to rule. That's why Yahushua offers him or gives him the rod of iron to rule over the nations, represented by Aram, as I already mentioned. So the head of Aram is Dameshek, the head of the exalted one. And remember that in Isaiah 52, at the very end, Yahweh refers to, well, we will see that eventually in Isaiah 52, Yahweh refers to the last as the one whom he will exalt, and he will be surprising to watch, just like it was to see Mashiach hurt on the cross. So that is an interesting verse that we will see eventually, I said, in Isaiah 52. So also in the let me see, the head of Aram is Dameshek. Remember that, like I said, silent is the sackcloth weaver. Remember that the last comes as a thief in the night. So a thief has to be silent. And the two witnesses, they get dressed in sackcloth. So that would also represent the last, Dameshek. Aram, like I already said, we could say exalted is the one, or will be the one, who comes silent with sackcloth, right? Confirming that That's what it represents. Now, if we see Aram in the negative sense, like I've been mentioning regarding the world leader, the world government, it would be saying that even though he's being placed as the world leader, the one who actually is the head would be the one who comes with sackcloth, the witness like Moshe. And then it says, and the head of Dameshek is Retzin. Retzin is firm. And we saw how in the previous, like when we saw all the names here, the message that we saw when we came to Retzin in the message, it referred to Yahweh, right? Who is firm on his throne. No one can move him. He is the one, unique, doesn't change, etc. As we see in Malachi as well. So for it would be like saying the head of the last is the first, and the head of the first is Yahweh. Right? So that is what we see here in the positive sense. And when I said the negative was like that, even though they will place the world leader, the true leader would be the one wearing sackcloth. And his leader is the one who is firm as the cornerstone, we could say in this sense, the foundation. And within 65 years, 65 in the numerical value of the letters would be a circle and the letter He, which is wind, spirit, revelation, a window. 60 circle is also a shield, a support. So, and within 65 years, Ephraim is to be broken as a people. Well, like I said, 60 is like a circle, so it will be when the circle is completed, then it will be revealed that Ephraim will be broken. And the head of Ephraim is Shomrom. So here it was talking about Aram who wanted to come against Yehuda. However, they had other powers over them, Dameshek and then Retzin. So it was third. Like I was saying, it's not even that big, not even that important, that exalted. And then when it came to Ephraim, it says is Shomrom. Remember, Shomrom was seen. Well, it was seen as less, and that's why Yahushua has to bring up the Shomroni to show that a Shomroni who would act well would be better spiritually speaking than a Pharisee or a very high or very important priest, right? Samaria, right? So which is Shomrom originally, Samaria. So and the head of Ephraim is Shomrom, and the head of Shomrom is the son of Remaliahu. Shomrom means those who keep, meaning the Torah, representing those who keep the Torah. So the head of the many, the head of those who are many, is the one who keeps the Torah. It's interesting that the few keep Yahushua, who kept the Torah, and obviously through the Ruach of Mashiach, they're able to keep it, and therefore they become the head of the many. And Ephraim, the head of Ephraim is Shomrom, and the head of Shomrom is the son of Remaliahu. And as we had seen, Remaliahu means protected by Yahweh. The many, the head of the many, are those who keep the Torah, those who are protected by Yahweh. Or we could also say, of course, and the few are under the last, whom Yahweh will protect. If you do not believe, you are not steadfast. So, and the head of Ephraim is Shomrom, and the head of Shomrom is the son of Remaliahu. If you do not believe, you are not steadfast. And Yahweh spoke again to Ahaz, And Yahweh spoke again to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign for yourself from Yahweh your Elohim. Make deep the request, or make it high. But Ahaz said, I do not ask nor try Yahweh. So here we see something interesting that is an error that people still commit. You know how there are people, I'm not saying this is the case, but it's just similar in a negative way. There are people who act humble but are not really humble, right? So there are people who do that with Yahweh, thinking they can fool Yahweh, right? On the other hand, we have Ahaz, who is confusing, asking Yahweh for a sign, even though Yahweh himself is telling him, ask me, with trying Yahweh or tempting Yahweh, which is something we shouldn't do, right? Like Yahushua said, you should not tempt Yahweh when the enemy, Satan, told him to jump and see if Yahweh would save him. So, well, jump from a high place, right? Not not just jump. So, there's a very huge difference between testing Yahweh and asking Yahweh to confirm something just in case you are not understanding or will make a mistake. So here, Yahweh is giving him the option to ask for a sign to confirm his faith, because he needed to be steadfast. This is important as well, because Yahweh is giving a word through the prophet. He's saying this is what's going to happen. They're going to fall. But you have to be steadfast. You have to believe. And therefore, since you have to believe for it to happen, then why don't you ask for a sign so that it is clear to you and you will be steadfast, and then the world will happen? So you see how Yahweh uses us, since he made us in his image and likeness, as partners for the prophecies to be fulfilled. Not that we need to help him, he will make it happen. Our help is just to believe that he will and is able to do it. So here he is afraid to ask for a sign. Ask a sign for yourself from Yahweh your Elohim, make deep the request, or make it high. But Ahaz said, I do not ask nor try Yahweh. And he said, Hear now, O house of David. So now he's talking to Yahudah. And maybe he was being a little bit of uh, negative, and reason why Yahweh is about to say this, because now he's talking, Yahweh talking to Yahudah. And he said, Hear now, O house of David, is it not enough that you weary men, that you weary me? Weary my Elohim also? My bad. So here is YishaYahu speaking, pretty much, which is interesting because I already mentioned that YishaYahu represented Yahushua, the word of Yahweh. So it's like Yahushua complaining because even though he did what he did to come and save us, he made the biggest sign in history by becoming the sign, dying and resurrecting, separating time before and after him. Even so, people do not want to believe or want to ask, or want to act saint, or saintly or set apart, when they are not, and it's all appearances and all of that. So here the prophet, as Yahushua, says, Hear now, O house of David, is it not enough that you weary men, that you weary my Elohim also? Therefore Yahweh himself gives you a sign. And you see what I just mentioned? I have forgotten that we were reading Isaiah 7. And it's amazing because this is exactly what the prophet is saying. It is the main prophecy in the entire scriptures about the birth of Yahushua HaMashiach as the sign, the most important sign in human history. Therefore, Yahweh himself gives you a sign. Look, the Alma, virgin, young woman. That's what he means. the Jews say that this has nothing to do with a virgin; it's just a young woman. However, the age of that young woman is pretty much uh, when they are regularly virgin or were back in the day. So this is a word that normally would be taken as a virgin because of the age of the young woman. However, since Yahushua fulfilled it, now they say that no, it doesn't mean that. All right. But remember that in Genesis 3:15, we have the first prophecy about Yahushua HaMashiach. Genesis 3:15. And it reads, "And I put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, the seed of the woman." So it was a woman who would give birth to a man without having the seed of a man, because it would be her seed. So here we see a prophecy of Yahushua coming from a virgin, and then Yahushua is being confirmed in that way on this chapter, on this verse. Therefore, Yahweh himself gives you a sign. Look, the virgin conceives and gives birth to a son. What a sign bigger than that. And well, like I said already, the other sign was at the end of his life when he died and then resurrected. So, two signs as a confirmation at his beginning and at the end, who brought a new beginning. um Therefore, now let me see something else. That was verse 14, which is the numerical value of David. And Yahushua was a descendant of David. So it would be like also saying that he would be born from a virgin from David, the king. So 14, Lachain yitain, certainly I will give you, well, he will give you, Adonai, to you, a sign. You see here, Ot, Aleph, Vav, Tav. Right? A sign. As you guys know, this is the first letter of the alphabet. This is the last letter of the alphabet, as when he says, I am the Aleph and the Tav, which they eventually translated as the Alpha and Omega, which are Greek letters. But originally, it was in Hebrew, for he is a Hebrew. So Aleph and Tav. Interestingly enough, the letter in the middle is a Vav. And the Vav is the letter used in Hebrew to unite words, just like N, the word N in English. Aleph and Tav. So the sign is actually that he is the first and the last. The sign would be at the beginning when he would be conceived by a virgin, and then at the end when he would be killed and resurrected. And in the middle, the Vav in the pictographic, and even there, is a nail that unites. That's why it unites words. In this case, then, the first, Yahweh coming as the first, would be nailed to a cross. Because remember that the letter Tav in the pictographic and the Paleo Hebrew is a Tav, is a cross. That's why the T is a cross as well in the letters that we use in English. So Aleph and Tav, the first will be nailed to a cross. The sign will be the beginning of his life and the end of his life. All of it is the word sign in Hebrew. So I will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin, Halma. All right. So going back to the 14th, therefore Yahweh himself gives you a sign. Look, the Alma conceives and gives birth to a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. Immanuel means Elohim with us, because Yahushua brought the presence of Yahweh to us. Now, this doesn't mean that he would be named Immanuel. It means that his name would be called Immanuel. Why? Because in John 14:26, we read that the presence of Yahweh, his Ruach HaKodesh, his spirit, comes to us in the name of Yahushua. So Yahushua is Immanuel. Why? Because the presence of Elohim comes in the name of Yahushua. Through the salvation of Yahweh, his presence comes to us. Now remember that Yahushua brought the favor and the truth. Yahushua said, I am the way, the life, the light. Yahushua is the water, etc., etc., right? So in Exodus 33, we read how Moshe asked Yahweh to know his way. And like I said, Yahushua said, I am the way. And Moshe said to Yahweh, see, you are saying to me, bring up this people, but you have not made known to me whom you would send with me, though you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my eyes. Remember, Yahushua came to reveal his name and the name of the Father and to give us the favor. Then he says, and now please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please show me your way. Yahushua said, I am the way. So here, Moshe, without knowing or knowingly, is asking Yahweh, please show me the Messiah. Please show me the first. Please show me your son, Yahushua, your way. And let me know you. So it is through Yahushua, who is the way, that we are able to know Yahweh. That's why when Philip came to Yahushua and said, show us the Father, Yahushua said, it's been so long and you have not known the Father. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So show me your way and let me know you, so that I'd find favor in your eyes. So when we have the way of Yahweh, we know him. And when we know him, is because we have his favor. Because if we didn't have his favor, we wouldn't be able to know him. And we wouldn't be able to know him if we don't know the way to know him. So Yahushua is the way to come to know him through the favor that we receive through his blood, which is the forgiveness of sins. So that I find favor in your eyes, and consider that this nation is your people. And he said, my presence does go, and I shall give you rest. So the way of Yahweh gives us the presence of Yahweh and rest. That's why Yahushua gave us rest from the accusation of the enemy by giving us the forgiveness of sins. This is what we were seeking, as Malachi 3:1 said. And the presence, because he came to his temple. The temple is his body, the congregation. So the presence of Yahweh comes to us in the name of Yahushua, who happens to be the way of Yahweh. Hope that's understood. And I'm not going to continue because we're not on Exodus right now, but then Moshe asks Yahweh to show him also the second manifestation. So then going back to Isaiah. Therefore Yahweh himself gives you a sign. Look, the virgin conceives and gives birth to a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. The presence of Elohim with us comes through the name of the son who came from a virgin woman. He eats curds and honey when he knows to refuse evil and choose the good. All the translations say that he will eat this until he realizes or is able to choose one from the other, which would be during his childhood until he grows up and matures enough in order to be able to preach and fulfill his testimony, his ministry, right? There are several things that we could say here spiritually. Mainly, this is something that comes from cows, right? And then something that comes from bees. So two different types of foods, right? From different creatures. One that is connected to milk, for instance, like the word of Yahweh, which is represented by milk, the beginning of a person's spiritual life when they are spiritually um they are pretty much children spiritually, right? We need milk, and then we go to honey when we are growing a little bit, but still kids. Honey, and remember that scripture says that the law of Yahweh, the words of Yahweh are sweet like honey. So he will study scriptures, the basics of mercy and law, the basics of the mercy of Yahweh and the commandments, that is, curds and honey, when he knows to refuse evil and choose the good. For therefore the child knows to refuse evil and choose the good. I'm sorry, I read it wrong. For before the child knows to refuse evil and choose the good, so pretty much before he is old enough to start his ministry, and this could even refer to when he was 12 years old, when they found him on the Omer Reshit, right? When they lost him for a few days in the temple. For before the child knows to refuse evil and choose the good, the land that you dread is to be forsaken by both her sovereigns. According to Judaism, this prophecy was speaking about YishaYahu, the king, Hezekiah. And it is possible that his mother was very, very, very young, and that's why Yahweh decided to use the word Alma and not a different word, because he would fit both Chizkiyahu's mother and also Yahushua's mother as a complete virgin. So in that sense, that would have been fulfilled after or at the end of the prophet's life, as a confirmation that it would be fulfilled in the time of Mashiach. For before the child knows to refuse evil and choose the good, the land that you dread is to be forsaken by both her sovereign. It's interesting that it mentions to refuse evil and choose the good, like the last who comes as the tree of good and evil and has to choose good, which is Mashiach, through his death and resurrection confirms that. And when he dies and resurrects, then the two leaders, the two beasts of Revelation 13, they will be destroyed. For therefore the child knows to refuse. For before the child knows to refuse evil and choose the good, the land that you dread is to be forsaken by both her sovereigns. Yahweh brings on you and your people and your father's house days that have not come since the day that Ephraim turned away from Yehudah. That means since they decided to separate from Yehudah, when Israel became two parts, those of the north and the south, like the few and the many. Days that have not come since the day that Ephraim turned away from Yehudah, the sovereign of Ashur. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh whistles for the fly that is in the farthest part of the rivers of Mizraim, and for the bee that is in the land of Ashur. So how interesting that he mentioned curds and honey as the food that the Messiah would eat, representing the teaching. And interestingly enough, there are normally flies around cows, and the bees are the ones that produce the honey. And they are mentioned in this case as the negative, as plagues that will come against the enemies of Yahweh, like in Egypt. So, and it shall be in the day that Yahweh whistles for the fly that is in the farthest part of the rivers. Now, let me see the fly, verse 18. Zebub, you see, as in Baal Zebub, the fly. And then Deborah, the bee. But you see how Deborah has as the root dabar, which is word. That's why the words of Yahweh are sweet like honey, and a word fulfills its purpose just like a bee. So here we have that as Yahweh sending punishment through his word, the prophecy, and through the enemy who brings death, which attracts flies. So, and it shall be in that day that Yahweh whistles for the fly that is in the farthest part of the rivers of Mizraim, which represents the false religion, that instead of teaching life, teaches death, and that's why it has flies. And for the bee that is in the land of Ashur, the world government. And how interesting that the world government is pretty much controlled by the Illuminati, and the Illuminati infiltrated or united with the Masons. And one of the main symbols in Masonry, let me see. Well, here are a lot, so it should be here. Let me find it. I wanted to see it in a different type of image, but here you see the bees, a honeycomb, right? But let me. So you see how they use here. You even have a bee inside the main symbol of Masonry. You see, this is what they use, what they wear, and there's one around there somewhere. All right, so how interesting that it mentions the bee in regards to Ashur, which represents the world government, just like Aram a few verses past. Interestingly enough, Aram and Ashur are respectively Syria and Assyria. So, for the bee that is in the land of Ashur, the world government, and which is controlled by those who worship Lucifer. Then he says, and they shall come, and all of them shall rest in the steep ravines and in the clefts of the rocks, and all weeds, and on all weeds, and in all pastures. He's talking about them as demons because that's where demons would uh, be, in the clefts of the rocks. In that day, Yahweh shall shave with a razor. In that day, Yahweh shall shave with a razor hired beyond the river, with the sovereign of Ashur. So he would use the sovereign of Ashur as a razor that would cut everything. Like I said, Ashur, the world government. So in a way, Aram could be seen as the old world order and Ashur as the new world order. They are both nations, but the enemy will destroy some with the last one mentioned. The head of the head of the hair of the legs, and also remove the beard. I repeat, in that day Yahweh shall shave with the razor higher beyond the river, with the sovereign of Ashur, the head and the hair of the legs, and also remove the beard. Remember that removing the hair of the head, mainly for women, will be a representation of shame. For men, it would be, well, it depends on the reason why it would be shaved. It would be for purification, or also a way of being humiliated, or being in, well, mourning, right? Like when wearing sackcloth and stuff like that. The hair of the legs, and also remove the beard. The beard was another thing that if a man didn't have it, would be also a type of humiliation. It would bring shame. Um, and it would represent, remember that Yahweh knows every hair that is on our head. So that represents how Yahweh, well, each hair represents a person. So, like, cutting every hair from the body would represent cutting every person from the nation. And it shall be in that day that a man keeps alive a young cow and two sheep. And it shall be that he shall eat curds because of the plenty milk he gets. For everyone left in the land shall eat curds, right? Because finally the basics of the Torah, the true Torah, will be taught, and there will be a lot of it. And it shall be in that day every place where there were 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver, let it be for thorn bushes and weeds. And it shall be in that day every place where there were 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver, let it be for thorn bushes and weeds. Just like we see in other parts of scriptures where Yahweh prophesies that those places where they would worship false Elohim, demons, false angels, fallen angels, their idols, those places will become the habitation of demons and those idols that they were worshiping. So, whatever they did spiritually and we couldn't see in this reality, eventually will be plain and obvious, meaning those supposed holy places in the world will be finally seen as wicked, evil places where the worst spirits reside. So let me read the previous one again. And it shall be that he shall eat curds because of the plenty milk he gets, for everyone left in the land shall eat curds. And it shall be in that day every place where there were 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver, let it be for thorn bushes and weeds. With arrows and bows one shall go there, because all the land shall be thorn bushes and weeds. And to all the hills which were tilled with the hoe you do not go for fear of thorn bushes and weeds, but it shall be for sending oxen to, and a place for sheep to roam. Oxen and sheep, like Yahushua came as the lamb from the sheep, and the last comes as the ox from the oxen. It shall be for sending oxen to, and a place for sheep to roam. And that's what happened, and in the literal sense, and what will happen in the spiritual sense. So that's how the chapter ends.